And so I always say like clarity over cleverness, right? It's like, don't get cutesy. You're not making a Super Bowl commercial, like your goal is not to make people laugh. You want to be very clear about what your product is. So I usually say it's like, what is your product? Who is it for? Why should they choose your product over the competitors? And how can they take action? And somewhere in your creative, those questions should be answered.
Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Really excited to chat today. I would love if you could give the audience just a brief background into your experience as a marketer.
Yeah, definitely. So been in tech marketing for about 10 years. My career started as like a growth associate running Facebook ads for a company called Represent. That kind of started my love for digital advertising, and eventually over the years became head of marketing for Represent. We were partnering with celebrities and helping them build and sell products online. So people like Leonardo DiCaprio, Jennifer Aniston, Arnold Schwarzenegger, they had causes they wanted to support. And as a way to do that, we would partner with them, create merchandise collections, and then help them sell it. And we were then purchased by a company called Cameo. Started overseeing Cameo's merch department marketing, as well as their spend on Facebook and Instagram, and doing, more work with celebrities. And, a lot of people are familiar with their video product. And then recently this year started Pure Funnel, an agency. I get to work with a lot of different tech startups and help them grow with advertising on Facebook and Instagram and Google, TikTok, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. A little bit about me.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive deep into the influencer marketing space today and talk in more detail about the way that you structured those campaigns. The way that I think about media at a high level is we're trying to get to a good conversion rate where we're taking an eyeball and then converting it into an action. And so as much as there's different dynamics at play, you have different metrics across the funnel that you're looking to optimize towards, and you can overemphasize vanity metrics and ignore things like CAC and profitability if you're doing it wrong. Just to give an example, if you were to optimize towards the lowest CPM channel, you could be driving a lot of impressions, but if you're not getting conversions, then you're kind of making a mistake. The quality of of a single impression can vary widely, right? Depending on who's seeing it, who the audience is, and also what they're seeing. The difference between showing an impression of Arnold Schwarzenegger, validating a product to a Arnold Schwarzenegger fan is very different than some random influencer that they may not be familiar with. And so I would pay more for that impression because I think that I'm going to get a better conversion rate there. So I think there's a lot to be said about just like the quality of creative as it relates to leveraging influencers. Maybe just give me a sense of when you kind of got started with this and started working with the celebrities, what were some of your initial kind of learnings as you started to work with them and intended to sell their products?
Yeah, definitely. So it was really fascinating because a lot of the times, like to your point about impressions and like the value and quality of them, like we would have clients that would have 40 million Instagram followers, and we would launch a collection with them and it would bomb. And then we'd have someone with 1 million, YouTube subscribers or even Instagram followers, and they would sell 50,000 units of something. And that was like the first time where I was like, wow, that like followers can just totally be a vanity metric. And so much of our job at Represent was trying to figure out who has these fan bases, these pockets of people who are just these rabid fans and they're super monetizable. And it was usually comments. That was like our leading indicator of like, if we're thinking about partnering with someone, it's like, okay, who has the most comments on a given post consistently? And but it was always, we never quite cracked the code of we can definitively say this person will be able to sell or not. It was always kind of this black magic of us trying to deduce, okay, how much do their fans really care about them. So I think that was really an interesting learning early on. And a lot of my job at Represent was, it was kind of two-sided. It was sales enablement, so like helping the client understand how to post best organically. So we had like a playbook of, you have this merch collection, here's your 14-day plan of like, post on this day, post on this day, here's roughly what you'll say. Sometimes we would literally write the post for them. And then on top of that, we had like a media mix that we were trying to maximize sales with ads and email, SMS, etc. So it was kind of that pulling the two levers of how can we best educate the client so they have a lot of success on their organic channels, which are going to be their best selling channels. That was always the case for us. And then how do we layer on an additional 30-40% of sales with these more the marketing levers we can pull.
Can you maybe give me a specific example of a celebrity that you worked with, maybe like a really strong case study?
Yeah, I mean, we worked with Arnold Schwarzenegger for many years, probably 5+ years. And he was great because he was always willing to try new things and some people were very involved in a good way. And some were people were not involved at all. Others people were way too involved in a bad way. And he was kind of like the nice blend of, he cared about it, but he wasn't micromanaging. And we did a shirt with him that was really the company's, I would say, first big success in terms of, okay, we can partner with these celebrities and sell a lot of a given product. So we did a shirt with him that said, come with me if you want to lift. And it was like kind of for people who like going to the gym, and it's like him with his arm outstretched with like a weight in his hand. I think we sold like 70,000 units of that t-shirt over time. And then as Represent, time went on and Represent, we got more sophisticated. We were building out like big product merchandising collections for him, like protein shakers and gym bags and anything you can think of. And we would create these kind of kitschy sayings and put them on the items. But Arnold was great because we had such a big list for him, so we were really able to leverage the email, the SMS, and advertising on top of what he was doing on the organic channels.
So, what did those economics look like, and what did that strategy look like in a little bit more detail? You had the organic side where he was posting, and then you also leveraged paid. What were the kind of KPIs that you were optimizing towards, and how are you, um, allocating that budget and resources?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, essentially, most of it was backed into a like CPA goal. So we were for Arnold. One part of the job was just how much volume can we drive with his organic posts, which is again like the content plan and arming him to be successful. But then the ads and email and SMS, that was really, can we drive a conversion for less than, let's say, $10-15. And the nice thing about working with the celebrities, it kind of felt like a cheat code at times because it's like they have these rabid fan bases who really care about them, and some of the people we worked with, they would buy almost anything that they put out. So we had these big lists, and that was really nice. But yeah, it was, my job was, can we add 20+% of revenue on top of what they're doing with these paid channels under a certain CPA goal of, let's say, $10. It really depended on the client, the collection, like what the AOV for the overall collection was. Like some people were just selling t-shirts, others had these much wider collections with like skateboard decks or these autograph posters, these much higher ticket items.
Sure. And maybe for Arnold's example, and if I'm getting too in the weeds here, let me know. But would love to know like what channels you were running, how you were structuring the campaigns, where you were driving, and then the creative you were using.
Yeah, definitely. So with someone like Arnold, it was really, so Facebook, Instagram, Google, email, SMS. Those were kind of our bread and butter channels that we would run for anyone of a certain size. So most of our clients. We were probably spending on a given collection, we would probably spend 25 to $100,000 on paid. For someone like Arnold, we probably had a list of 250 to 500,000 people between email, SMS. So essentially, we had our 14-day plan or whatever. Like a lot of the Represents thing was kind of these limited time flash sale collections. So they would only be available for, let's say, 14 days. So we would have his organic plan, but we would also have our paid plan layered on top of that. So like day one, it's like the intro email, and we start running ads. The creative for the ads was typically very heavy on just photos of the celebrity in the product. Like that was like the gold for us. And it was so funny because that was always pulling teeth for some clients. Not for Arnold, he was great. But like they would send us like photos in their mom's kitchen or something, like a really bad selfie where like the lighting is horrible. And all of us would just cringe when we got them, because that's nothing was better than that. It was just like the celebrity in the product and where they look happy, and hopefully we would get 10 images or so. We could deploy those across email and ads, but that was really like almost all of our advertising was just photos of the celebrities.
And like broad audience targeting, were you spending to retarget audience lists? How were you doing that?
Yeah, so this is a few years ago now, which was before really like the before broad was kind of a best practice. So it was always funny. I would talk to our meta reps, right? And they'd be like, you need to be using more lookalike audiences. And that's really when meta was pushing lookalikes. And every time I would test, lookalikes were just underperforming interest groups. And so the nice thing about working with an Arnold Schwarzenegger is there is an Arnold interest, that I can target. So that interest group would just crush for us. And I would do things like, major movies that he had been in, like Predator or something, or True Lies, whatever. And those interest groups just killed it for us. And lookalikes didn't really. And it was before broad was like as much of a viable strategy. So it was really that like the old school, Facebook advertising with like interest group segmentation and that type of thing.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, whatever works, right? I know that now audience targeting has become a lot more automated. As you're talking, and I'm thinking about kind of the strategy. One thing that I've been thinking about a little bit more, stepping back from a performance marketer lens and looking at marketing even from like a CMO lens, is that I actually think that a lot of brands could trade off media dollars for dollars spent in organic content. And, the way you can think about this is, if I'm going to spend $20,000 on Facebook ads and it's going to be at this CPM, I'm going to drive this many impressions. Here's what my conversion rate might be. You could also say, I'm going to deploy that $20,000 against content creators, and here's the estimated reach. And you can kind of start to get a sense of like what your conversion rate could be. Now, the job of a marketer is to optimize that, right? And like you need to do a little bit of both. Even like more granularly than that, it's like the percentage of spend to deploy against like influencers. There's probably some good benchmarks you could think about developing there. What I mean by that is, if you're spending $5 million a month on media, you're probably spending a good amount of money on ad production, right? If you thought about it, maybe trading off some of that ad production costs to spend on a celebrity might be a better long-term business value for you, right? It's really interesting. It's like smaller startups, it might be harder, but yeah, it's a question, right? Like, if you're even like a seed stage startup and you're raising around, do you want to put 5% of your budget into just like a celebrity deal, and is that worth it for you?
I think in an ideal world, you can do both, and they're symbiotic, right? Like if you're paying someone to be the spokesperson for your product, and you're really leveraging like the appeal to authority, right? Like people love seeing authority figures in their space like talk about a product, and that's just like hardwired into our brain. And if you're a startup and there's that one person in your space, you're like, wow, if that person was talking about our product, that would really affect growth for us, right? That would be a really worthwhile lever to pull. You can also support that content with paid, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a celebrity. It could be 10 creators that you're paying to generate content, and then you can turn around and use that content, put spend behind that content and use it in your advertising. And I think that's where it gets really interesting nowadays, is it doesn't have to be just this like influencer marketing versus paid. It's like, one of the companies I work with is a travel app, and we partner with this creator. She generates content, and then that's always our best performing ads, is just like her kind of organic feeling UGC TikTok style content that she produces. So it's you're kind of killing two birds with one stone.
Right. From your perspective, having a background in doing a lot of stuff with celebrities and influencers, and now owning your own startup and working with a lot of clients. When you think about the components of a great ad, what are some of the things that you think about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I tend to gravitate towards advertising, especially on like Facebook, Instagram, that is very, very clear cut, very literal. Like, you don't have very much time to make an impression on someone. And so I always say like clarity over cleverness, right? It's like, don't get cutesy. You're not making a Super Bowl commercial, like your goal is not to make people laugh, or it's you want to be very clear about what your product is. So I usually say it's like, what is your product? Who is it for? Why should they choose your product over the competitors? And how can they take action? And somewhere in your creative, those questions should be answered. And then I think there's a lot of psychological levers you can pull, and things that you can pepper in your ads, like particularly social proof. I just think like social proof is the easiest brain hack ever. It's like we are still hardwired from 100,000 years ago to want to know that someone has tried something before we do, because we don't want to have a bad outcome. So if you can put reviews, testimonials, trust indicators like your star rating, or even like trust pilot icons or logos, it's like things like that go a long way in just building trust with people and getting their attention. So I think it's kind of being very clear about what it is you're offering and who you're offering it for, and then layering on those psychological principles that kind of are like the brain buttons that you can push.
Right. I love that. I also think Hermosi actually came up with this, but something I've been thinking about recently is if you think about your product or service and you think about all of the objections that a potential prospect could have to purchasing this, how can you address all of those as much as possible, right? And I think it depends on the like specific asset we're talking about. You're not going to do that in a Facebook ad, but perhaps on a like on landing page, it's like what are the reasons why they're not going to purchase, and like how can you get them to respond to that? Social proof is a large one. I don't trust, right? Like I don't trust this product. I don't think it's going to work for me, and so that's a big one. But yeah, that's something I've been thinking about. When we talk about kind of performance creative strategy and building out kind of an experimentation and testing plan, it can get pretty sophisticated, specifically as you're operating at scale and you're thinking about testing a couple things. I feel like marketers can go in a couple different ways. One way is we're going to throw the kitchen sink at this and we're going to create thousands of ads. And now with AI, you're able to do that, right? You can create a bunch of different copy variations, a bunch of things. Another route is we're going to pick the 3 to 5 value props or benefits that we know that they work. And then we're going to just kind of continue to put those out into the market. 6 or 12 months ago, I would have said it's more about testing velocity. I want to test a bunch of different things and know what works. But I think there's a trade-off there. And the reason that I say that is that I believe that, well, I don't believe, it's fact that customers will need multiple impressions to convert, and they need to hear the same messaging reiterated over and over and over again and drilled into their brain. How do you think about that kind of dichotomy of like testing velocity to learn a bunch of things versus the repetitive nature of messaging that ultimately leads to conversions?
Yeah, I that's a great question. I think when I'm approaching a brand, the initial research phase is really saying, what are the core pillars? What are the or buckets, if you will? What are the three buckets of messaging that we want to focus on? So it's like it kind of goes back to that. What is the product? Who is it for? That sort of thing. You pick the pillars, like the content pillars of how what are the things that really what are the value props that really appeal to people, right? And then you can take each of those buckets and say, okay, we're going to message those three things. We're going to message them in very different ways. And that's kind of like the angles and like picking out different features that you can highlight that speak to those, wider content pillars. So that research in the beginning really has so many downstream effects. Like I think to your question of like how do you balance the dichotomy, it's everything will come back to those three main things that we're just hitting people over the head with, but we're going to say it in different ways, and we're going to highlight different features and benefits and different niche groups that the product might appeal to. And then it's kind of just testing. I think you can do both. I think you can both hit people over the head with things many times, like get that repetition in, but also do it in ways that maybe they don't even think of it as it's being repeated. It's not like annoying. It's through all these different framings and lenses and angles, and you're kind of just seeing what resonates amongst those angles within your wider content pillars.
As you think back to the clients that you've worked with and all the channels that you've managed, can you think of a couple of ads that really just like crushed it or were memorable for you? And maybe if we want to go to some of the celebrity stuff, or yeah, take that in any way that you want. um,
Yeah. Well, one that I'm working on right now that I'm really enjoying is I work with a staffing company called Persona, and they basically find they have this really interesting algorithmic process to discover elite talent globally and then staff them at tech companies in the US, right? Rather than kind of go I think people think staffing and it can kind of be like conservative and kind of stodgy, whatever. We went the opposite route of, okay, we're going to run Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn ads that with things that say like hiring sucks, we'll do it for you, or I love hiring, no one ever. And then we realized that started resonating way more than anything. Like we had probably tested 50 different ads, and those were just like super standout. So then it's like, okay, well, how can we iterate around those those concepts, because those are really strong concepts. We'll put 50 different backgrounds on I love hiring, no one ever, 50 different backgrounds on hiring sucks, we'll do it for you. And I think that's so much the process that I enjoy is like, okay, we're seeing something that's working. Now, how do we reinvent it so that it's fresh? With the celebrities, it was a little more straightforward in that most of the ads were like the copy was almost more interesting to me because the so many of the ads were just the photos of the celebrities in the gear. Like I wasn't having to put as much thought into the actual creative. Yeah, and exactly. Like nowadays my work is with startups, which a lot of them don't have brand recognition necessarily, so it's just more challenging to break through to people and to kind of get them to stop that scroll and to pique their interest and get them to click through to a website. So things like that, where it's just how do we take an industry that necessarily like doesn't necessarily isn't associated with bold marketing and insert some intrigue.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and the reality is for much of the audience listening to this, that they are marketing, products or services that require more explanation. As you were talking about the hiring example, I thought about my approach to creative production and testing. So if we assume that you're a startup running a multi-channel media mix, you're doing some paid search, some paid social ads on Facebook, TikTok, etc. You're doing TV. You might even be doing affiliate marketing, direct mail. You're testing within a bunch of formats, and you want to launch a new product. You have to figure out, how am I going to launch this across my active media mix with a bunch of different channels? My approach and what I really like to do is think about, let's learn and understand what are those main messaging value props, like those big, bold things that work. And let's use paid search, Facebook ads, image ads, simple stuff to understand it. And then we can extrapolate that and create more interesting concepts on places like TikTok and TV. So, like an example of this in your case, if we know that we're launching on Facebook and we test a bunch of different things around hiring, right? One thing could be like hiring sucks, don't do it. One thing could be like you're overpaying for talent in the United States. Why are you doing this? Different things. Once you get those learnings and you find out hiring sucks, it's like, okay, now let's create the concept of hiring sucks with a video ad, and let's go a little bit more exaggerated into it.
100%. And I think that's the smart way to do it. Like sometimes with clients, if we, sometimes it's kind of obvious, like what the messaging angles are going to be, or at least the ones we start with and start testing with. But sometimes there's 10 possibilities or 5, 10 possibilities. And that is where, sometimes I'll just run essentially headline tests. I'll just put a messaging headline on the same background, 10 different headlines, and see what resonates. And then exactly what you said, it's like it's that process of, okay, now we know that X, Y, and Z are intriguing to people and leading to conversions. It's like, now let's go to the whiteboard and figure out how do we deploy those messaging angles across like a wide variety of channels, and even just within like Facebook, like the Meta ecosystem. It's like across the different like placements, or a carousel, a video, statics, that sort of thing. So I 100% agree, like that's my process as well, particularly for some clients where it's like define the messaging and then figure out how to scale it horizontally.
As you think about working within more competitive spaces and kind of developing messaging that differentiates a brand, do you have any strong perspectives there? Do you spend a lot of time as part of your research process looking at what competitors are saying, or do you think it's kind of more about the unique that whatever is going to work for that brand, and we can just like hone in on that messaging?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do look at what competitors are, kind of how they're positioning themselves and where, the blue space, if you will, is in the market. I do think for me, I spend more time unearthing what is special about the company that I'm working with. So, you know, talking to customers, figuring out like review mining, like going through reviews, seeing how are people describing, like even talking to internal team members is really helpful. Like what do they think is special about what they're doing? And then you kind of over time get a feel for, here's why this offer is attractive to someone, or should be, or we think it will be attractive to someone. And you have, let's say, those three angles. So for staffing, maybe it's like higher quality talent than you can source yourself, saves you time, people don't want to hire, and saves you money, right? And it's like, okay, those are the angles we're going to hit. Now let's iterate on those. Let's think of the best ways that we can deploy those, and see what's resonating, and then just cut the losers, scale the winners, and go from there.
For sure. Another thought too, if you're a consumer and if you think about your own kind of consumer psychology and how you make decisions, often you're not doing this very like competitive comparison chart, looking at all of the different things in too much detail. I think when marketers develop creative, they kind of forget that a little bit, and they think, hey, we have to over explain these value props, where it may be that if you take product A and B, like let's just say Coke and Pepsi, for example, that the brand of Coke, and if Coke was to hire a celebrity that you admire, that in itself will improve conversion rate more than it has 50 less calories or whatever it is. So in terms of like the reasoning for choosing a product, it there are these like emotional psychological components that might be more qualitative.
Totally. I mean, I think the best advertisers in the world, like the Nikes and the Cokes, and they have that figured out. Where it's like a lot of times I'll see what they have figured out is that emotion plays such a large role, and that overrides, like, our brains are just, we're emotional creatures, right, more so than logical, and that will always override. I do see, like, a lot of times, like, ads and landing pages just way over focusing on features, which I always think is very funny. As a consumer, you just care so much more about benefits than these individual features, and the companies that I think are really great advertisers can both tell you enough about their product to make you interested and understand why it's valuable to you, but also not overdo it with, like, the minutia of the features.
Right. It's funny. This probably is going to come completely off topic, but I've been getting into this concept. It's a book. It's called Die with Zero, and it's the idea that you, instead of saving a bunch for retirement and over saving and dying with a bunch of money, you should aim to optimize your life around fulfillment. One of the concepts within the book is this idea of a memory dividend. And the idea of a memory dividend is, like stocks pay interest and compound over time, memories also pay interest and compound over time, meaning the ski trip that you take with your buddies at 28 years old, you're going to have a benefit within that time period, but then you're going to have memories that you think back on, and it's going to provide you with that tangible benefit, right? The application from a marketing perspective is that when you have a positive brand experience, it's almost like a memory dividend in a way. And then when you think back and you have that positive experience, it kind of like pays you back. And so, taking the example like Coke, it's so hard for somebody to think about choosing another soda when they think about Coke, and these emotional kind of connections come up to. I remember being a kid riding my bike when I was like 12 years old, and vanilla Coke came out, and it was like this thing that we had to go get, right? And there's no like, yeah, it's hard to quantify the impact of something like that. And if you think about that, then you look at the impact that like working with a certain celebrity can have, that's been around for a while. Or even Gary Vaynerchuk talks about, buying these brands that have a lot of nostalgia associated with them. There's a lot of brand equity there.
It's so funny. I was gonna mention Gary Vee too, because that's exactly where my brain went. Is like, he talks about the power of nostalgia, and that's why he buys those brands. And I think that goes back to what we were saying about the emotion behind advertising. Is nostalgia so powerful, and it's also so subtle. Like, I think nowadays, especially as like digital marketers, we want to be able to quantify everything, but it's so hard to quantify the user journey that you've had over however many years of your life with a given brand like a Coke, right? It's so layered, it's so complex. It's not, you clicked on a Facebook ad and then a Google ad and whatever. It's like, it's so multifaceted. And it's interesting you mentioned that book, because that's been recommended to me a few times, and I really want to read that. I think it's like, I'm very into personal finance and a lot of those personal finance books, and I think it's very contrarian. So I want to read that and kind of get a different perspective on that.
Cool. Yeah, I'll share a couple podcasts with you as well, and I'll leave them in the show link, in the show notes.
That would be great.
Yeah, it's frustrating me too, even from like a data analytics perspective. We'll look at things like on a channel mix, and we'll say, okay, the LTV of, we'll look at GA4 data, last click data, and then say, okay, Facebook last click LTV is X, Google last click LTV is Y. And then we talk about these users like, oh, these are the Facebook users and these are the Google users. And it's like, I don't know if that's the case. It's just that Facebook got that, captured that click last, and then we're going to extrapolate quality there. I don't know. It's tough. But anyway, Sean, thank you so much for being on the show. This was a really fun conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
Where can folks find you?
Yeah, so my website, purefunnel.com, is probably the best place. LinkedIn, Sean Bacastow. Those are the places, probably the best to go.